Okay, I want to show you another method for creating these sparks, other than just using the glow effect on particons. And the other method of doing this is to use hypervoxels. And we might actually get a lot better effect if we were to use hypervoxels right now. So I'm going to change the scene for this to be hypervoxels for these sparks for all the objects, which I haven't yet copied over. But I want to go ahead and show you what it will look like with the glow effect on a separate scene. So I'm going to switch to another version, or another open window layout, and kind of show you what those particles are going to look like when they're rendered with the glow effect. So I have just a cleared scene here, and I'm going to create a particle emitter, and I'll just kind of set this up the way we have it with the other one. Generate by frame. This can start at 0, that's fine. Change resistance to 0, 60 frames is fine. Explosion we'll set to 5, and that should be good. We'll take a look now at the surface editor, and we'll go and give it that surface we had before, that kind of orange, up the luminosity 100%, and we'll do the turbulent texture of that dark orange, changing this to, let's say, 0.5, and then this was 50%, 0.75, 5 frequencies. Oh, and there's one other thing actually we gotta change, and we'll give it our glow intensity of 50, like we had, and go back to our effects panel, enable the glow, and set that to 75% and 20. And now I'm going to go ahead and render that. And as you can see, you can't really see that glow effect too much right now. I'll go back and edit our surface editor, and we'll change our glow intensity. We'll just up that to 100, and we'll give that a go. And you still can't really see that glow effect, it's not really kicking in. So I'm going to up the intensity to 250, glow radius of 30, and render that. Okay, it's showing up, but it's a little bit large, so we're going to increase the intensity again. Actually, we're going to go up pretty high this time and go up to 400. Maybe we'll decrease the glow radius to 25, and render that. And there you go. Now you can see kind of that glow you'll get. And this is just what the glow effect looks like. And it's a real quick and easy way. But I want to use hypervoxels because it's a little more advanced and you have a little more control over it. And it takes a little more time to set up, but in the end it'll look a lot better. And actually when it renders too, when you have this glow effect, since it's a post-process effect, everything's going to be rendered, and then it's going to apply that glow effect, which is really going to kind of conflict with our hypervoxels that we have. So if we do it as hypervoxels, it's actually going to look a lot better. But I just wanted to go ahead and show you that method and that technique in case you're on time constraint, and that's a quicker way of setting it up, and you don't have to worry about rendering with hypervoxels. Also too, if you're not using hypervoxels in the scene at all and you're using an image sequence for the explosion, this is an easy way to keep hypervoxels out of the scene. So I'm just going to go ahead and close that out. And now we're back to our regular scene. So now we're going to apply our hypervoxels to this particons we have right here. And actually, since we decided we want to do hypervoxels with this, we're going to go ahead and open up the Objects panel under Geometry, and actually HV Custom Object is we've already added to it. So we're just going to open up Hypervoxels, and we'll double click on Sparks to activate it. And I'm going to pull up Viper. And this is what it looks like so far. The default, which is just kind of a big glob of gray. And we're going to change our particle size to 0.04, which is going to be 40 millimeters. Actually, we're going to bring that down to 20 millimeters. And we'll change this to normal so you can see the sparks in there. And we'll also give it a see, this is another advantage of using the hypervoxels, is we can give it a size variation so that it's different size particle sparks, and we don't have to create separate particle objects with different line sizes. Because actually, if you go to the objects panel, I can show you right now, under render, or actually under edges, particle line thickness, right here you can determine and set how large you want your particles to be. 1 pixel is default. You can bring it all the way up to as many pixels as you want, and you can even do fractions of pixels, 0.5, 0.25, and things like that. But in order to have that reflect on the same object, you would have to, or well, you can't reflect it on the same object. You'd have to create several different objects, and you can't get a variation unless you do it like that. So this is a lot quicker way, actually, to create our variation. And it will increase our rendering time a little, but that's alright. So we're going to increase our variation to 100. And this is just going to make them a little bigger in some areas. And we can pretty much do the shading just like we did with our particons. And we're going to set that. We're going to actually use sort of a kind of a brighter yellow-ish orange. And you can see that right there. We're going to need to increase our luminosity to 100. So we get our sparks in there. We're also going to put a texture map on the color. We're going to set that procedural. And we're going to do that dark orange again. And as you can see, that dark orange is nice and scattered about. I'll go ahead and make it a little bit smaller of a texture though, 500 millimeters all the way down. But as you can see, we have yellow in some spots and that dark orange showing up in other spots, and it's just a good way to create a nice variation throughout the spark, so it's not all just one continuous color, and it will look a lot better overall because of that. We don't need to worry about shadows or anything like that, because this is going to be a luminous object, and adding shadows with it is just going to take forever to render. We're not going to need a hypertexture, because it's just going to be pretty much balls of flame, so we don't need to worry about a hypertexture on that, or the scale of the hypertexture. And it's pretty much finished as far as the sparks. And we'll do another render and see how it looks when it's smaller. And we get that nice little... Oh, it's going to start at 30, I believe. So we'll do it at 31 and see how it looks. And we'll just get a nice bit of sparks kind of shooting out in the scene. And I think we only have about 1,000 for this particle, or for this emitter, and that's okay. That's going to be enough because we're going to have it also exploding everywhere else, and plus we still have our debris objects. And we'll go ahead and switch this to a scene preview at frame 65, and you can see now we have our sparks in here with our debris objects, and that way we have a nice brighter objects in there with the dark debris objects, and it adds little bits of sparks. And they look like sparks. And once we add, with the final scene, we're going to be using motion blur. Because you always want to use a little bit of motion blur. And in this case, we're going to be using not a ridiculous amount, but enough to give it so these kind of have a little bit of streaks behind them, and it all kind of blend together and look real nice, kind of like a film look to it. So you can see the sparks in here. And if we want, we could increase that amount. Actually, I think I will now that I'm looking at it. It looks like it needs a little bit more. So just go to our object properties and dynamics, and under the emitter, see we do have it set to 500. So we're going to set this up to 1,000, and then we'll render that. It doesn't look like it added too many more. We'll set that to draft mode, and maybe we'll do 1,300, and our particle limit to 1,300. And set that to normal, just so we can see it. And because these particles are so small, we are going to have to set it to normal with Vipers so that we can actually see them, because in draft mode it's going to be very blurry and you won't really get to see them too much. But I'm looking in over here and it looks like we have enough, because I'm just kind of looking at the ratio per amount of debris objects we have, and that looks like it's pretty nice. So we can just close all this out, and now we'll go ahead and clone this new actually HV object, and it's no longer a particle emitter, it's a HV particles. And we can go ahead and start cloning that and parenting it to our debris objects, and then of course adjusting the velocities to match up with what we have for the debris objects. Okay, we've gone ahead and copied all of our sparks objects, cloned them, and matched them up to our debris objects. And as you can see now, we have lots and lots of particles in the scene. If you go to the perspective view and kind of zoom out a ways, you can see that the whole scene is completely filled with particles, and it's a little hard to differentiate what's what, and that can happen once we get so much going on in the scene. And of course you could open the scene editor and kind of turn things off, but right now we're pretty much done with all the particles, so there's not too much more we need to do except set up our render, and of course we also need to add our initial lights without any shadows on them. But I'm going to pull up just our Viper really quick and do a render with scene preview with all those particles in there, and you can see them all with the debris objects all over, and maybe we'll find where there's a nice burst of them. Looks like right there. There's a nice burst on the bottom. And we're getting and we also have ours shooting out over here. But there's a nice amount coming out down here, and of course once we add our motion blur, since we have our particles going for the sparks a lot quicker than our debris, it will be blurred a lot more, and it'll look a lot nicer and look more like it would if we were actually watching an explosion of a planet. Okay, so now what we need to do is set up our lights for our explosions. And I'm going to go ahead and save this really quick, just so we don't lose any information. But the only major difference we're going to need to do for the lights is that we turn off ray tracing on them. And we of course are going to need to edit the envelopes so that they fade out a lot quicker and we get a nice little burst of light, and then we'll get our light rays and things like that. Because the thing is, with the way our lights are at right now, where we have our light rays kind of shooting out, there's no real blast of light for the explosion until after the fact, or after everything's already kind of exploded. So if we were to take a look at this light that's in here, creating the rays that are going to be shooting out around this first piece that's kind of breaking off, what we'll notice is we get a delay. So this will happen right here, and then right when that kind of breaks through, then the rays will start shooting through. And it'll look almost like there's just a light in the inside, and it won't look like part of the explosion. But we do want those light rays in there, so we're just going to go ahead and copy each one of the point lights and paste it, or just clone it, and then we can parent it to the light we cloned it from. And then of course edit the envelopes so that it matches up. And actually we might not want to clone it, just because if you take a look at what we have for our lights right here, if we were to clone this first light, it would be named 9, light underscore EX underscore 001, and then in the parentheses it would say 9, and it wouldn't say 1, 2, like the clone of 1. It would be the clone of all the other clones, which would make it 9. So we might want to create a new light for that, just so we can separate which lights are which in the scene. So we'll go ahead and do that right now. Alright, so we'll start with light 1. Actually, that's the one we're not going to be cloning it though, but we will set up, actually we can clone it and then change the name of it. So we're going to clone that first one. That's going to change it to 9, like I said it would. But we want to change the name of it, and the easiest way to do that is just go to schematic, and we have light 9 right here. Actually turn off that targeting, and just right mouse click on it, go to rename, and we can call it light EX full. And then we can just start cloning that full light, and we'll just hit motion options right now, and we'll go ahead and parent that to light 1. And now we need to edit our properties on that light. And what we're going to do is actually turn off Effect Specular, and we'll just turn these off. And under Shadows, we're going to turn those off. And we're going to set its intensity down real low, but first we're going to open up our Viper, and we'll set that to Object. We'll have to open up our volumetric light options first. And we just want to see the effect that we're getting. Of course, that envelope is on there, so I'm going to go ahead and remove that envelope. And you can do that just by holding down the Shift key and clicking on that E, and that will remove the envelope, in case you didn't know how to do that. And we can see it's not real bright. Of course, this isn't the frame we're at right now where we have this. This is kind of left over from our previous render. So actually, if we change, oh, that's still going to leave that behind. So what we'll do is increase our luminosity to 200 and see how that looks, because this is going to be showing over everything. And like I said, it's not going to have any shadows, so we can turn off that opacity cast shadows as well. And we can actually change the quality, since we're not going to have to worry about shadows, just to low. And that'll give us a little more variation in there too, and it'll render, of course, a lot quicker. Attenuation, we can turn that down now. And the opacity can stay where it's at. Redshift can stay where it's at. Density, we can up our density, because we just want that to see what our flash of light's going to look like once that explosion happens. And we're getting a nice fall off on the edges over here. And we'll turn down our luminosity, maybe up attenuation a little. Maybe you just want to kind of mess with it until it looks like how you want it for that blast, for the explosion. And okay, and we can close that out. And we also need to set up the envelope for this. But before we do that, I'm just going to go ahead and clone everything and then parent it to the other lights. And now we can clone this object. And we also want to make sure that this light isn't affecting anything. So actually I want to go back and open up that Viper again. And for the light intensity, see, if we change it to 0, what's going to happen is that light's not going to show up at all. And if we go up to 50, how we had it before, you can see that makes a real big difference. And actually, we might have to go back and change those other lights up to 50, and then manually go through and turn off what objects it's affecting. For this one, we're going to set maybe not to 15. Let's go try 30. Just adjusting the overall brightness. It's maybe a bit bright. We'll try 20. And you just kind of play around with it until you get the right effect. 22. And we'll take a look at our fall off here. And there, that should be good. We'll set our intensity fall off to linear and 5 meters, and that'll just designate it to that small area right there. And we'll see what 4 looks like, just so we get that nice blast right there, maybe 4.5. And we don't have to worry about getting that outer glow too much, because we're not going to need too much of it. But we're going to go back now, and since we had changed all these lights to a lower level, as you can see, it's not really showing up. And that's mostly because I forgot that the light intensity affects, of course, the volumetrics. So we're going to change that back up to 50 the way it was before, so we get that nice brightness in there. And that's how much we're going to need. And go through all of the other objects and change those back to 50, except for the new one we just created. And that one's 22, and that's fine. But what we might also want to do is, since these lights are affecting all these other objects so much, what we can do, if you want, is go through each of these 30 or so objects, and under lights, you can exclude all of these lights. So we could just go through and check mark these, and as you can see, that's affecting that shape in there as I just turn off all of these lights. I'm going to leave them on right now. Of course, that will affect your render time, and if we do decide that we don't want that to be lit so much, we can turn that off. But that's also one of the reasons why I kept that texture for the cut so dark. And we could even go ahead and change the diffuse on that, since we do have so many lights in the scene. Change that down to 70, or actually maybe even 60, and up our glossiness and decrease our specularity. And it looks real dark in here, but with all those lights shining on it, it's going to show up exactly the way it looked before we started editing and adding all those lights. So now I can go and grab that new light we have right here, and we'll just clone it, and then hit M on the keyboard, and we're going to parent that to EX. Oh, we have the full right here, EX2. And then we can clone that again, motion options, and we can set that to 3, and we can clone that. I'll close that out, clone it, get the fourth one, EX4, clone that, M for motion options, change that to EX0015, clone that, M for motion options, EX0016, clone that, motion options, and we change that to 7, clone that, motion options, and 8, which is going to be the last one. And then we'll just go through, and we're going to figure out exactly how long each one of the blasts need to last for each one of the explosions throughout the planet. And we're going to have to envelope each individual light and figure out just when to time it, and we'll just set up that and it'll fade out, and of course that won't be affected by shadows, so it's going to be a nice blast throughout. It's the way it would really be affecting the camera lens, but since we still have those original lights in there, we can also get a nice ray light around it. And actually, another thing we can go and do, if we wanted, is instead of using the exclude on each one of the 30 objects for that light, you could go ahead and turn off the effect, diffuse, and specular and all that. Or you could go through in here, and it might even be quicker this way to exclude our objects that way. And that's just another way you can do it. Like I said, I'm just going to leave it the way it is. And now we'll go through, actually pull up our light options again, go to volumetric lighting. Actually, we got to make sure we select our new lights that we have, the fulls. Light properties, go to volumetric lighting, and we're going to pull up our Viper, just so we can have a good idea of how bright that's going to be. And we need to take a look at where that first light is, and we can use the perspective view for that, and we'll target on that and just kind of zoom in there, and that looks like that's our first one that we made, our first light. And its position needs to be reset so that it matches up with the previous light. Actually, gotta make sure we do that on the 0 frame and reset that, and now it's exactly where the other light is. And if we take a look, like I said, it's not going to matter where the object is, or where the light is inside of the object, because of course there's no ray tracing involved, so therefore it's not going to affect the shadows. So we also do want to make sure we move this to where the main explosion is, where we want to show it. And right here, it doesn't look like it's really going to be the center. So actually we do want to kind of move that back to where it was, about right there, because we'll just start out pretty much on frame 30, and then we also want to fade it out in about 30 to 45 frames, because we don't want it to last too long. So make sure we pull up our volumetric light options, and we're going to be doing this. Let me decide whether we're going to do it or not with luminosity or with density. And if we change that back to 188, and just want to see what effect we get by adjusting the density and adjusting the luminosity. And it looks like we're getting pretty much the same effect. So we can leave those both at 188, and we're going to do an envelope on the luminosity. So make this a little bit bigger. And we know that that starts. Of course, you can't really see anything that's really going on right now. We'll go ahead and move this over to the side for right now. And we're going to close out these light properties just so we can take a look and see where everything's at. And it starts at 30, and like I said, we're going to want it to end. Let's have it end at 50. So it'll last 20 frames. Actually, that's kind of quick. And depending on how long we have it dissolve out, but we'll go ahead and add these keyframes. That one made 28, so we'll turn that into 30. Our value, 188. And it's going to start out not at 188, it's going to start out at 0. And it's not going to come in until 30. So we're going to have, actually we're going to change that frame back to 28, set the value to 0, add another key at about 35, because we don't want the initial frame to, of course, be the brightest of it. We want it to kind of fade into it. Turn that to 188. We're going to make this linear, because these next frames are the ones that are going to matter for how it blends inward. And we're going to add another key at 58 is fine. And we can add another one. It's actually, let's do 65. If we can move that down, the value, of course, is going to be 0 for the end. And then we can adjust how we want this to be, because we don't want it to be like the other ones. We want it to be nice and bright and then have a nice little fall off. So it should peak at a point. And we can go ahead and move that from 28 to, let's say, 27, just a little bit before. And take a look. And we'll bring our Viper back. And just go through and watch and see how it reacts. And it gets nice and bright. And then it starts to fade down. Okay, that's looking pretty good. So we'll have that brighten up and then fade out. And now we'll just go ahead and do that for all the rest of the lights, setting up our envelopes depending on where we want our bursts to be for each one of the explosions.